Okay. This is going to be part 3. Researching color making. Rows of bottles containing colored ink were laid out in a small glass rainbow, and attached to each bottle was a tiny wooden board describing the combination of oil and materials that had formed the color. Joseph was in the process of relocating them to a shallow wooden box. We had stopped experimenting for the day since Joseph's and Heidi's arms were tired from hours of mixing. Lunchtime was approaching, and the only two diptychs we had on hand were completely full. Not even borrowing Lutz's diptych after mine had run out of space had been enough to contain all our data. I looked over both while thinking about the results. It's not great that the color is near impossible to predict. But we figured out some general trends, eh? And it's so nice that we have all the results labeled so clearly like this. I'm glad you were around and knew how to write, Lady Mine. You're the best, Heidi exclaimed, beaming as she looked over at my diptych. She could understand a few words and letters that were relevant to her job, but she was still basically illiterate. In the past, she'd have no way to record the results of her experiments, having to instead rely entirely on her memory. I think you being able to memorize such complicated test results is a lot more impressive, personally. Sadly, Heidi only seems to have a good memory when it comes to her experiments. It's far from perfect, Joseph said with slumped shoulders. Lutz looked at me and gave a teasing grin. That goes for mine, too. She only puts in this much effort and dedication when books are involved. Lutz and Joseph seemed to have bonded over this and were patting each other's backs in a show of consolation. It's nice to find people you can relate to. Each day gets a little more fun. Okay, I'll have these test results compiled by the day after tomorrow. Thank ye. I don't know how to write, so that's all up to you. Heidi and I shook hands and exchanged a smile before going our separate ways. I wanted to go straight home to start compiling our results, but Gil pulled on my sleeve while acting kind of hesitant. What's wrong, Gil? Sister Mine, I want a diptych too. Gil murmured, his eyes lowered. That reminded me. I said I'd make one for him once spring came, since he had learned to read. Okay, let's stop by Johann's smithy to order a stylus for you. Then I can go home and compile the results. The ink workshop wasn't too far from the smithy, since both were in Craftsman's Alley. Johann might not be happy to see us, since we'd be visiting right after lunch break. But we headed for the smithy nonetheless. Good morning, is Johann here? The foreman glanced away from the customer he was dealing with to look over at us. The second he saw me, he stifled a guffaw and forced out a "Hey there!" before gesturing toward an empty seat. I'll go get Johann for you, he said. Hey, Gutenberg, your patron's here! Lutz and Gil heard the cut of their mouths and stopped themselves from laughing. It seemed that Gutenberg had stuck as a nickname for Johann in the smithy. Foreman, I told you to stop calling me that. I thought Gutenberg was quite a respectable name, but Johann clearly didn't like it too much. He came bursting out of from the back, meeting the foreman with narrowed eyes and a big frown. Good morning, Johann. Oh, Lady Mine, welcome. Sorry for coming right before lunch. Do you have time to take an order? I'm still not done with your last order, Johann said with an uncomfortable expression. He was still working on the additional letter types I had ordered, but that wasn't a big deal since the High Priest already put a stop to movable type printing. Johann could take his time making a ton of them over the next couple of years. Please prioritize this order. I would like you to make a stylus for Gil just like the ones I ordered previously. Absolutely, Johann said, his face beaming. He even pumped a fist into the air. It's been so long since I made anything but letter types. So long, he murmured, an emotional tear dripping down his cheek. Honestly, I feel kind of bad now. Sorry, Johann. Since I was his only patron, he had apparently been making nothing but letter type after letter type. And on top of that, not just the foreman, but now all of his co-workers made fun of him for his Gutenberg title. Maybe I should pop in every now and again just to give him different things to do. I'll try to give you orders for things other than letter types soon. I needed an iron for the wax stencils, as well as a stylus and a file for the mimeograph. There were a lot of things I would want his help to make, but all of them were tools for printing. I'm very much looking forward to working on something other than letter types. Johann's smile at getting the stylus order made me feel just a little guilty. No matter how I looked at it, he wasn't going to escape his fate as Gutenberg. Having ordered Gil's stylus, we left the smithy just as fourth bell rang to signify noon. You're going home, right, Mine? Uh-huh. I'm hungry and want to get back to the store as soon as possible. Come on. Get on, let's hurry. Let's crouch down for me to get on his back. Apparently he'd end up getting less food if he wasn't back soon. Knowing that I would be dead weight and just slow him down otherwise, I climbed onto his back without protest. He stood up and dashed off in a half run to the plaza where our well was. You stay inside and start compiling the test results after lunch. I'm going to go check up on the mine workshop and give Master Benno a report on all this. Don't go outside, okay? Let's set me down in the plaza and put his diptych into my hands before immediately running off toward the Gilberta Company. It looked like he really was worried about his lunch. After seeing him off, I turned to look at Daniel and Gil, who were both blinking in surprise. Sir Damiel, Gil, thank you for accompanying me. You may both return to the temple since I won't be going outside anymore today. Alright, you'll want to come to the temple tomorrow, I take it? Yes, I would really like to go to the ink workshop, but Rosina will be very unhappy if I miss too much Heartspiel practice. I put Letz's diptych into my tote basket and climbed the stairs home all alone. I'm home, I whispered while quietly opening the door, though there was no escaping the creaking of the rusty hinges. Welcome home, mine. You're back early, Mom said after I slid inside. She was probably preparing lunch, given that she was standing in front of the hearth. Mom, how's Camille? Is he sleeping? Did I wake him up? I asked, glancing over at the bedroom. Don't worry, he's fine, Mom replied with a small smile and nod. I snuck into the bedroom to have a look at Camille's face, then put my stuff down and washed my hands before eating lunch with Mom. We were only halfway through when Camille started to cry in his tiny voice. Mom hurriedly finished her food and sped over to him. Sorry, Mom, but could you clean up for me? I cleared away our dishes before starting to copy the results of today's experiments from the diptychs onto my notepad made of failed paper. The seemingly nonsensical results began to take a more sensible form once I had them all lined up together. Linseed oil tended to make blue colors, Miche green colors, Pigeon red colors, and Ice yellow colors. Term would make seemingly random colors, but they all had pastel tones. There are some exceptions to these rules, but I think I've gotten a grasp on how they work. We can make a surprisingly wide range of colors with these combinations. All it took was listing what made which oils change to which color. You look like you're thinking hard, Mine. What are you working on? Mom asked when she returned from the bedroom of Camille, who was wrapped in what resembled a long baby sling. His eyes were wide open, maybe because he just filled himself up on milk. I'm planning a picture book for Camille. It's going to need pretty colored ink, which I'm trying to make now. You're making it from scratch? That sounds like it'll take a while. It will, I think. How is Camille today? I asked, while stroking his head. He stared at my face without blinking. I couldn't compare to Delia's overwhelmingly big sister power, but Camille not crying over my presence was good enough for me. Camille, it's me, Mine, your big sister. I spent some time playing with Camille until eventually his eyes began to droop again. I watched Mom take him back to bed, then looked back at the list I'd made. Oh! While looking through the oil names, I realized what the oh-so-familiar Peru oil wasn't involved. It might be worth experimenting with that too. I wonder what would happen. Maybe I should bring some to the workshop. And also, we need to test to see whether the ink we've made changes color when put on paper. Not to mention whether it lasts over time. Experimenting with layering colors will be important too. I wrote down everything I wanted to investigate that I could think of. Those were things I would have to ask Heidi about next time I saw her. The next day, I went to the temple for my daily Heartspiel practice, then helped the high priest. In the afternoon, I spent time with Delia, who was always bored and listless while Dirk was in the orphanage. I had Let's get some paper and brushes from the workshop. Tomorrow we will be bringing them to the ink workshop to test the ink on. And so the next day arrived. Gil, Damiel, Let's, and I headed to the ink workshop with the paper, brushes, and the rest of our Peru oil from the winter. Heidi was pacing in front of the workshop. It wasn't hard to imagine that she had been dying waiting for us. The second she saw us, her face lit up and she gave a big wave. Morning, Lady Mine. It's so good to see you. Morning, Heidi. Here's the chart of compiled data. I showed her the research I had compiled as soon as we were in the workshop. She peered at it with excitement, then slumped over sadly. I could tell what some of the stuff is, but I can't read most of this. Also, I had a thought while compiling this. I began listing out all the things I wanted to try, which earned me a big, eager nod from Heidi. I didn't include any Peru oil since you can only harvest them in the winter. This may make for some interesting results. Let's try it out right away. Heidi and Yosef began mixing various materials into the Peru oil I had brought. She tried out red materials, and he tried out blue ones. Then they mixed them, ground them, and stirred them a ton. But there were no weird changes. Both simply turned into the color of the material put into them. Both batches of Peru oil turned into the colors we expected. That's incredible, I said, looking at the finished ink with wide eyes. I had seen so many weird changes of color that simple, logical results were enough to impress me. Heidi let out an impressed whistle at the finished ink. The colors are red, real vibrant too. If only we could get Perus outside of winter, huh? Heidi was right. Peru oil couldn't be used liberally, since Perus could only be gathered on sunny winter days. The oil was great, but sadly not suited for high-volume production. While Heidi and I were sadly consoling each other, Joseph was already preparing for the next experiment. Let's try getting the ink we made on paper, yeah? Heidi helped Joseph bring out all the ink we had made the other day. I leaned over to Les as I watched them prepare. Hey, Les, do you think we can make paper out of Peru trees? I asked, full of hope after seeing how well the Peru oil worked for this. Trombas were fey plants, and they made good paper, so maybe Peru trees would make for good materials too? Nah, that'll never work. Those trees just melt and vanish when fire touches them. They disappear if you try boiling their wood, and there's no way we could peel their bark. Are Peru trees really that weird? Having never gone to the forest during the winter, I had yet to see a Peru tree. I'd heard about how they're strange, beautiful, and only appear on sunny winter mornings, but other than that, I really don't know anything about them. Lady mine, everything's ready. At Heidi's call, I beckoned Gil over so that he could test the ink on the paper using his brush. I had brought several paper sheets of poorly made Volren and Tromba paper that we wouldn't miss. We weren't going to be making picture books out of Tromba paper, but it was still worth seeing how it handled the ink. Oof. Unsurprisingly, the ink even changed color depending on the type of paper it was put on. The color stayed pretty much the same on the Tromba paper, but ended up more dull on the Volren paper, though it wasn't really noticeable unless you compared the two side by side. It's fine, I tried telling myself, but as time passed and the ink dried, the colors just kept getting more and more dull. I think we'll need to make other kinds of paper and experiment with them too. I could have wept as I compared the colors on the Tromba and Volren paper. Lutz, on the other hand, just gave a light shrug. Volren is the only kind of paper we're going to be using for a while, so why not just make colors that look good on that? He was right, the Mine Workshop was only making Tromba paper and Volren paper at the moment. If we wanted to make the picture books anytime soon, we needed to focus on making colors that were suited to Volren paper. Its red color was really pretty before, but now that it's on paper and has dried, it's more like a dark blackish red. It'd be good for drawing blood. We don't need a color that's only going to be good for that, Lutz yelled. I pursed my lips. Maybe we would need an ink that's only good for blood. It wasn't uncommon for religious myths to get bloody. This stuff's real tricky, Heidi murmured as she glared at the changed ink, her arms crossed. I think I understand why art workshops keep their paint recipes secret. It really wasn't easy to make colored ink independently. According to Benno, paint production wasn't bound by any magic contracts, so any workshop could make it as they pleased. But the production methods themselves were kept secret by the workshops, and none were on sale in the lower city. The workshops making paint for art-loving nobles delivered their goods directly. I know this from Rosina, who had been the attendant of one such art-loving shrine maiden. You couldn't get certain colors anywhere except from the workshop that makes them, so apparently Christine had favored a number of workshops at once. Lady mine, let's figure out why it's changing colors. Like I said, the results are the important thing here. I could appreciate her dedication to discovery, but my goal was to make picture books for Camille. I didn't have the time to waste on superfluous research. I wanted usable colored ink as soon as possible. Let's try layering the color next, Gil, would you? As you wish, sister mine. Gil drew a blue line across the colors we had already put on the paper, and the overlapping parts darkened significantly. It wasn't pitch black, more of a really dark version of the mixed color. Not a single one of the combinations could be described as bright or vivid. If we had a danger do not mix sign on hand, this would be exactly the right time for it. What are we going to do? Gil asked, holding up the sheet of discolored paper. The result was so unexpected that we were all at a loss for words. All we could do was stare in silence at the dark colors. Joseph eventually broke the silence. Guess we should just stick to separate colors for these, he said with a shake of his head. But I'm pretty sure you gotta mix colors to paint things properly. Seems like there are still a lot of secrets behind the paint that art workshops use. Heidi was right. If our ink turned black when mixed with other colors, we wouldn't be able to draw anything like the paintings in the temple's nobles section. The paint used in this world definitely had a secret to it that I didn't know about. Let's stop for today. No matter how many colors we make, it won't matter if they change over time and turn black when mixed. Maybe there's some way we can sneak the secret to making paint out of an art workshop, I thought, slumping my shoulders in despair over the ink making being stalled. The fact that we hadn't made any usable colored ink meant we had failed. I returned home with my head hung low and reported the day's results to Tuli as I helped her make dinner. Which means the colored ink doesn't work. I don't know what to do about it. You definitely don't want to mix colors to turn black, right? It's a big problem. It just wouldn't be usable for printing no matter how hard I tried. I stirred the pot of soup while pursing my lips in a pout. Mom, who was watching us cook while breastfeeding Camille, put a hand on her cheek in confusion. You're not using a fixing agent when putting the ink on paper? What's a fixing agent? I had read about fixing agents for photos and art back in my Arano days, but had no idea what kind of fixing agents were used here. Seeing my confusion, Mom returned her gaze to Camille and continued. A fixing agent is a liquid used to stabilize colors. We use them when dyeing to stop the color from fading over time. Mom, could I ask for specifics? How exactly do you make a fixing agent? I looked at Mom with gleaming eyes, but she just furrowed her brow in confusion. Is this something I should be telling you? I'll check to see whether it's bound by any magic contracts later. Well, I suppose it won't be a problem then. I trust you to make sure it's safe for you to make. Mom said with a somewhat uneasy tone before continuing. You could apparently make the base of a fixing agent by putting the sap of a tree called a nade into the stem of a flower called herane and then boiling it until it went all gooey. When actually using it, you want to dissolve it with about 20 times as much boiling water. Be careful, I'm sure there will be differences between using it on cloth and paper. Thanks, Mom, I'll give it a shot. Now that I knew about fixing agents, I immediately asked Lutz to get the necessary materials for me. He seemed to have not known about fixing agents either, judging by how his eyes widened in surprise. I didn't know there was something like that. We might have never figured it out if Mrs. Zeppa didn't work in a dye shop. I want to get the materials together and try making it right away, especially since Mom went out of her way to teach me how to make it. I started humming in excitement at our new discovery, but both Lutz and Gil stopped me. You should just teach us how to make it. Yeah, we'll make it. You shouldn't do it yourself, Sister Mine. If we were going to make it in the mine workshop, then I wasn't allowed to do any work. I pursed my lips at being the only one left out, but no one backed me up. I had Benno look up the magic contracts through the Merchants Guild and search for materials, setting the stage for us to start making a fixing agent. When the time finally came, both Lutz and Gil were bouncing with excitement over this new challenge. I handed them both boards with detailed instructions on them, and that was that. My job was done. I didn't like being left out, so after Harspiel practice with Rosina, I told her about the colored ink in order to vent my lonely frustration. And now Lutz and Gil are making the fixing agent without me as we speak. Do you not think that it is just cruel? But Rosina was less sympathetic for my plight, and more just surprised that I didn't know about fixing agents. Oh, you did not know about fixing agents, Sister Mine? She asked, her eyes wide. They are essential for drawing. Without them, no colored art could be done at all, really. In a shocking twist, the temple also had someone who knew about fixing agents. Apparently they were essential for art, but since Rosina had only ever used finished fixing agents, she didn't know how to make them. Do you by chance not know how to use fixing agents either, Sister Mine? I do not. May I ask you to teach me? Mom only knew how to use it for colored dye. I would need to know how to use it for art when making the colored picture books. Rosina gave a refined giggle at the immediateness of my request. You must put the fixing agent on the paper ahead of time and allow it to dry. That way there will be no discoloration, even when layering different colors of paint, Sister Mine. You seem to know a shocking amount about everything, but I see there are some simple things that escape your grasp. I have simply never taken the time to draw with paint or ink before. Indeed, Rosina murmured before clapping her hands together and smiling. In that case, would it not be wise to have Wilma teach you how to draw once you finish the fixing agent and colored ink? Art is an important cornerstone for any woman of culture to learn. I shall think about it. I gave an ambiguous reply, but already had a clear response on the inside. No thanks. I don't want to lose any more free time than I have already. That said, some part of my heart told me that it might be smart for me to learn it now, since in 2 years' time I would be a noble's adopted daughter whether I liked it or not. Yeah, knowing some stuff about the arts will help you in the long run. Or at least make them see not look down on you. Using the fixing agent production process that I had learned from Mom, and applying it as taught by Rosina resulted in us being able to layer multiple colors without them becoming black or discolored. The colored ink was complete. Challenging wax stencils. We had finished something that at least resembled proper colored ink. It required us to use a fixing agent or else the ink would turn black when we layered the colors on top of paper. And they would still turn black when mixed together on the palette, but still, progress was progress. Ah, we sure finished that in no time, Heidi murmured, sounding like a kid who had just had their toy taken away from them. Personally, I was just relieved to have finished the colored ink, but Heidi seemed disappointed that we hadn't figured out what made the colors change like that. Joseph poked her cheek, an exasperated look in his face. Now that the ink's done, she's not going to be paying for the research anymore. Playtime's over. Well, considering how much of a success this was, I don't mind paying a bit more if you want to continue your research. My offer made Heidi bend a full-faced grin, and Joseph spun around to look at me in complete disbelief. I think further research will be important if we want to make more vibrant colors and just generally increase the number of colors at our disposal. I had prioritized finishing some form of color ink due to time constraints, but I don't mind you continuing your research. And since I didn't feel like investigating why the colors changed myself, I was more than glad to let someone else do the job for me. Lady Mine, you're the best. Please, you're spoiling her. Heidi, Joseph, as far as I'm concerned, you are both now Gutenbergs, I grinned. Having found more Gutenberg allies to propel my dream forward, ink was essential to the development of printing, and now I had it. Lutz cradled his head, murmured something about there being more of them now, while Heidi and Joseph just blinked in some confusion. Guten, huh? We're a what? Gutenberg, a name of a heroic, nay, godlike being whose legendary accomplishments changed the history of books. As it stands, Johann is the Gutenberg of metal letter types, Benno's the Gutenberg of plant paper, and Lutz is the Gutenberg of selling books. There's also Ingo, who helped make the printing press, and now you two are the Gutenbergs of making ink. It's only natural that I would find the Gutenbergs who are making my dreams of reading a reality. I proudly puffed out my chest as I gave my explanation, but Joseph's baffled expression remained. Heidi, on the other hand, was jumping for joy. We're Gutenbergs, Joseph. She has worked for us. She'll fund us. She'll let me do research. Yahoo! We had already made colored ink. I had no objections to Heidi continuing to research it on her own time. I'm sure that knowing why the ink changes color will prove useful in the future, so please keep up the good work. You can count on us, Heidi exclaimed. However, your highest priority should be making the ink. If you don't finish an order before the due date, I'll cut off your funding without a second thought. Ink! You're the kind of person who loses sight of their surroundings when they get absorbed in their research. I need to make it clear what your priorities should be and lay out a punishment for you when you fail to stay on track, I said to Heidi as firmly as I could. Birds of a feather sure know how to clip each other's wings, huh? Looks like you know exactly how to keep her under control, Lutz said with a chuckle, while Joseph plopped a hand over his own mouth to hold back his laughter. It seemed like he would be able to keep Heidi in check. Well, that takes care of colored ink. I think I want to start working on the wax stencil next. The next thing I needed to get ready was the wax stencil, an essential part of mimeograph printing. We would first need to make thin wax paper, but then we would be able to make stencils by writing out what we wanted to print using a metal stylus, which would be much faster and easier than cutting out the text parts like we would for normal stencils or setting up rows of letter types. This will also allow us to print more detailed art, which would let Wilma's work shine even brighter. The stencils we're using now aren't any good. It's not that they aren't good at all. They can make picture books after all, but with wax stencils we'll have a wider range of expressions available to us. It's way easier to just write on wax paper using a metal stylus than it is to cut each individual letter out of normal paper, and it'll let us use more precise lines. To make wax stencils, we first needed paper thin enough that one could see through it. But while Lutz and I had spent the past 2.5 years making paper, those in the orphanage didn't even have a year of experience. The thick paper we used for picture books wasn't so hard to make, but getting thin paper of equal size was a little rough. They were already trying in the mine workshop and were failing a lot more than they succeeded. Apparently the paper kept ripping when they were taking it out of the frame or putting it onto a board to dry. This would be a lot easier if we could just use tromba wood. Lutz crossed his arms and frowned. Tromba wood fibers were thinner and longer than Voron fibers, which made it easier to switch them into an equally thin sheet of paper. But tromba wood was too rare and valuable for us to make into stencils. It'll end up really pricey if we can't make them out of Voron. Yeah. All I could do was leave Lutz and Gil to keep trying to improve the paper. As the workshop continued to make a paper for the picture books, they gathered the people with the most dexterous hands and set them to work making thin paper. Days passed as everyone worked hard to see what could improve their success rate until one day Lutz came to my chambers after lunch. Mine, a message from Master Benno. Sounds like he got in contact with the wax workshop. They're free if you're available tomorrow afternoon. Really? Perfect. Now Gil can have his own diptych. That night I asked Dad to make a diptych the same size as Lutz's for Gil. All it needed now was some wax inside. My own diptych was running low on wax, with most of what was remaining having hardened to an inconvenient degree. This was a good opportunity to fill mine up as well. So I went ahead and scraped the remaining wax out. Good morning, Benno. Hey, let's get going. Benno hefted me up on the spot and started walking. Over his shoulder I could see Lutz and Gil racing to keep up with him, Gil hugging the diptych frame I had given him close to his chest. Diamio faltered for a second after seeing Benno roughly pick me up out of nowhere, but it didn't take long for him to realize that I never would have been able to keep up with Benno's strides. He followed after us, trying to match Benno's pace. Benno, if I had a method for making wax not smell, how much could I sell that for? I had to have a quick business discussion with Benno before we reached the workshop. I didn't want him yelling at me for being out of control or doing things I shouldn't have later. It's better to sell that kind of thing to the whole guild like we did with the ink production process. A single workshop doesn't have the funds to make a deal like that. Oh, I see. It seemed a lot of money was involved in these kinds of deals. I would likely end up funding the research, development, and refinement that each of my Gutenbergs needed to perform. I began thinking about how the negotiations would go when Benno interrupted me in a low voice. I'll handle negotiations for this later. Don't put yourself front and center here. They might have someone like Wolf in their guild. Okay. And let Benno take care of the negotiations for the salting out method. We could talk later about our cut of the profits and how the negotiations will go down. If we're putting off negotiations, is there any point in us even going to the wax workshop today? I want to fill my and Gail's diptychs. Also, I want to buy different kinds of wax. Just buy? Benno asked, and I nodded. I wanted to first see if we could make wax stencils without needing to improve the wax. It would be a stroke of luck if we could. And if we couldn't, only then would I have to try to improve the wax. I hope we can make wax stencils using just normal wax, but if we can't, I'll try to get the wax workshop's help improving the wax. I would want them to add resin similar to pine resin to make it a little stickier. Wax used for mimeograph's wax stencils had pine resin or paraffin mixed into it, but since they definitely didn't have any paraffin made from crude petroleum here, I wasn't sure how far that knowledge would take me here. Given the strange coloration that we had seen with the colored ink, it was more than likely that weird stuff would happen to the wax as well, so I really wanted the help of a professional. Alright. We're just buying stuff today. We only need to get involved if you fail at whatever it is you're doing, right? Right. Benno entered the wax workshop with me in tow. The heat inside was oppressive, and the stench of what seemed like animal fat was so thick that it made me want to hold my nose. The foreman came to see us right away since Benno had sent word of our arrival ahead of time. Good to see you, Benno. What business brings you here today? Could you pour your cheapest wax into these? I asked, holding out my and Gail's diptychs. The foreman nodded and did so right away, remembering me from last time. Gil stared at the clear wax eagerly. He hadn't touched it yet since we told him to wait until the wax had hardened. But he was grinning with excitement anyway. Every now and again he would blow onto it, trying to speed up the cooling process. It was a little cute. Gil, if you do that, then the wax may have an uneven surface when it hardens, I said with a smile. Gil jerked and looked in my direction. Yeah, she's definitely right, Let's added. She poked hers a lot when it was hardening, and it ended pretty bumpy. Let's shut up. I glared at him for spilling my secrets for no reason, and Gil stepped away from his diptych while laughing a little. Apparently he didn't want to repeat my mistake. Hey, Benno, there's got to be something else, right? You wouldn't have contacted us if all you needed was this, the foreman said, walking over to Benno after putting away his tools. Benno nodded. Yeah, I want a small box of every kind of wax you sell here. Every kind? You're not after candles like usual? Yeah, and don't mix them up. We want your wax, not your candles. Benno's order left the foreman dumbfounded. The owner of a major store like the Gilberta Company, who usually only came to get a specific number of candles of a particular size, was suddenly asking for every kind of wax he sold? And not even as candles? He never could have predicted that. What in the world do you need it for? Now that I can't tell you yet, Benno grinned, and the foreman put a hand on his cheek and thought. He knew Benno had been making new product after new product, and it was clear that he was wondering whether he was bearing witness to the next new invention. All right, I'll have him at your store by tomorrow. Good, I have 1 or 2 boxes of some wax you have on hand. Yeah, I can get these no problem. The foreman went into the busy workplace to speak to the workers. Then, once he returned, we left the workshop with 2 boxes of wax in hand. There, you can start working now, yeah? Yep, thanks, Benno. After returning to the Gilberta Company, I tapped cards with Benno to pay for the wax. I then wrote down the salting out process on paper and worked out a price for him negotiating on my behalf. With that done, Benno would work things out with the wax workshop for me. Okay, let's start experimenting as soon as we get back to the workshop, I said, handing Gil the boxes of wax. Let's gave a worried frown and grabbed my shoulders to stop me. Mine, hold on a second. What are you doing? What's the plan? You haven't given us half of the explanation we needed. Get us up to speed, then go back to the temple. Since I couldn't do any work at the temple, it was necessary that I give my explanation first. My plans had been to do it in my director's chambers, but it would probably be easier to keep the information under wraps by taking it over at the Gilberta Company. I nodded. You know the thin paper we made, right? We're going to thinly apply wax to it. We'll shave the wax down, sprinkle it onto the paper, and then use a clothing iron on it. That's it. Simple, right? What's that, and where can we get one? Let's gave a little frown at my simple explanation of how to make wax-covered paper. It seemed that the phrase clothing iron didn't get carried over. I tried to explain what it was while searching my memory. It's a piece of metal with a flat bottom that gets really hot and straightens out the wrinkles on cloth. Does that ring any bells? I would think they exist in clothing workshops or the homes of rich people. Considering how smooth my ropes had been when Karina made them, I was pretty sure she had one. Benno spoke up from the side. Yeah, Karina's workshop has an iron. You need one? According to Benno, rich people in clothing workshops had wide pot-like things that they filled with charcoal to heat up. It resembled a charcoal iron from the past. My family naturally didn't own one since we just wore second-hand clothes, and Lutz didn't know about them for the same reason. Benno, do you sell irons in the Gilberta Company? Nah, you gotta order those from a smithy. Not everyone needs to use them, and you don't need more than one anyway. Gotta say, though, irons make a real mess if someone sucks at using them. Are you sure you can handle one? Apparently the pot-like irons could spill ashes and dirt up the surrounding area if you weren't careful. I would have preferred a simple to use electric iron, but that was a bit beyond my capabilities to make. Not to mention you would need electricity for that, and electricity in general does not exist. For now, I'll try to improve the shape and order one from Johann. It seemed that an iron would be out of my reach for a bit. I fell into thought. Let's do the same, crossing his arms while mulling things over. We've got the motivation and knowledge, but not the tools. This sure sounds familiar, mine. Think about some more. Do we really have everything else we need? Let's ask, remembering how much he had struggled when we didn't have the proper tools for making paper. I put a hand on my cheek and tried to remember the exact process for making simple wax paper. You cut the wax down into small pieces, then sprinkle it on top of the paper. This should be easy since we can just shave it down using a tea strainer, which you can buy at general stores. Then we sprinkle the shaved wax on top of the paper and... I froze mid-sentence and paled, my mouth agape. Lutz was right, I had forgotten something else. I squatted on the ground, head cradled in my hands. No, we don't have baking paper. Huh? What? I was trying to make wax paper in the most simple way possible, but we didn't have baking paper. Naturally, I couldn't make those on my own, or at least I didn't know how. It's just not happening. Try and think of a solution before you go off and get depressed. Is there anything that can replace it? Lutz asked. I furrowed my brow and thought, before baking paper was invented, people used aluminum foil and paraffin paper. Aluminum foil will get all wrinkled and prevent us from being able to make an even layer of wax. And if you consider paraffin paper as more or less paper that needed a coating of paraffin wax, it was basically the same thing we were trying to make in the first place. It's something meant to stop the melted wax from getting everywhere, but maybe sticking normal paper in the way would work? I hope it will, but I don't know. What do you think, Lutz? Back on Earth, I was pretty sure that a sheet of copy paper could be used to block any excess melted wax, which meant a sheet of normal paper should work too. At least, I think it should. I want to believe. Don't ask me, I don't know about any of that stuff. Are there any other tools you'll need? That should be everything for making the wax paper, but I'll want a mimeograph stylus and a file so I can test whether it be usable as stencils. Making wax paper was as simple as melting wax on top of paper and then letting it dry, and while there was a chance that the iron would get wax stuck on it, or otherwise dirty up the area, it probably wouldn't stop us from succeeding. The only issue was whether or not this wax paper would be suitable for making stencils as is. A mimeograph stylus and a file. Is Johann going to make those? Uh-huh. Then those are both in Johann's jurisdiction. I stood up and gave Lutz a big nod, which made Benno's lips curve into a grin. My sympathies to the Gutenbergs are dragging around. You're a Gutenberg too, Benno. It's not just Johann. Why are you talking like you're not in the same boat? I asked, which wiped the grin off of Benno's face. He grabbed my head in one hand and spoke in a low, growling voice. Every single person you've called a Gutenberg is buried under a mountain of work right now, struggling each day to keep their heads above water. Don't you think there's something you should be saying to all these people you're dumping loads of work on day after day? Huh? I floundered, my eyes darting between Benno and Lutz, unable to think of what he wanted me to say. They both looked at me with the same harsh expression, waiting for me to answer. Thank you, essentially, is what you're to be saying. Thank you! I'm sorry! It was clear that I wasn't going to be getting any hints. Let us continue striving to spread books across the world together? Wrong. Show us some appreciation. Benno roared, grinding a fist against my head. Thank you, thank you. I exist as I am today, thanks to you and Lutz. Benno, I'll continue being a burden on you both, but thank you for sticking with me, I yelled with teary eyes. Benno made it sound like I should feel bad about giving all the Gutenbergs a lot of work. But I only had a limited amount of time I could spend with Camille. I had no intention of slowing down on making picture books. If anything, I wanted to speed up some more. Johann looked like he wanted work other than making letter types when I went to get Gail's stylus, so I gave him the blueprints I had written out for an iron, a mimeograph stylus, and a mimeograph file. When he learned they were all tools for printing, he truly understood that he would forever hold the title of Gutenberg, and before my eyes he wept tears of joy. I don't think those are joy. I think that's sadness. Despair. Okay, let's do one more. Delia's progress. I had ordered the tools we needed to make wax stencils from Johann, but it would be some time before they were done. In the end, Wilma finished her art for the next picture book before the tools were ready. It was a story about Flutrain, the goddess of water, and her 12 subordinate goddesses, themed around spring. Hey, look, since it'll be a while before the tools are made, should we just start working on the next picture book? Wilma had been working on the art for these since before we finished colored ink, so the stencils had all been made under the assumption that the illustrations would be printed in black and white. As a result, we were planning to print this round of books in black and white. If we were printing in black and white with plain stencils, we could print without needing to wait for the tools to be done. We still didn't have much paper since we had only resumed production in spring, but we could always just buy some from the plant paper workshop Benno had made. I want to use the printing press since we finally have one ready, but the high priest said no. Give up on it and just get to cutting out the stencils. Let's shut me down immediately, so I simply sighed in defeat and got to cutting. It was a true shame to wait for. It was a true shame. We had worked so hard to make metal types in a printing press, but it was all for naught. There's a lot of stuff you can do before resorting to using the printing press you were specifically ordered not to use, right? You need to talk to Fran and the high priest about the colored ink before it being done, and you should tell Wilma about it as soon as possible so that she can draw art with color for your next picture book. She'll have to think about that and the printing method when planning her next illustrations. You're right, I haven't had much time to properly sit down and talk with Wilma since she's been so busy looking after Dirk. I'll try to go to the orphanage this afternoon to see her. Let's and I walked down the street while talking. A mother with a child on her back passed us, which made me realize something. I stuck my hand in my tote bag and took out a bag with 2 wooden tubes and some small stones. And Dad had carved and hollowed out the tubes, and I had thoroughly cleaned the stones. Could you put the stones in these tubes and glue the caps back on? Sure, but why? Let's blinked in confusion at the stuff I had given him. Both tubes were identical, and once the stones were inside, they'd function as rattles. They're baby toys, one for Camille and one for Dirk. They make small noise once you put the stones inside and shake them. Oh yeah, I know of something like that. They look kind of different, though. I'd like to color these and make them look cuter, but I don't want to put ink on something a baby will probably be putting in its mouth. A baby as 2 months old as Camille and Dirk wouldn't be able to see colors that weren't vibrant enough, so I would want to cover them in bright red ink. But I felt resistance toward putting ink on something that would be going inside a baby's mouth. Ink made out of edible materials was always an option, but then I would have to worry about bacteria growing inside the ink. Well, they're not going to last long either way, right? We could just use some of the ink we made out of edible materials back in the workshop. What else are we going to use the colored ink spent so much time on? It'll be a while before we can print it with it anyway. Okay then, can I ask you to do that, Lutz? Sure, I'll get them to you this afternoon. I said my goodbyes to Lutz in front of the workshop before heading to my chambers, where Rosina was waiting with the harpspiel in hand. Good morning, sister mine. I gave a bemused smile at Rosina's brimming enthusiasm, then looked at Delia as she played with Dirk. Delia, I would like to change clothes. Do you have a moment? As you wish. Dirk, I'll be back as soon as I'm finished. Wait just a moment. Delia regretfully separated from Dirk, then speedily started changing me. She put my blue Shrine Maiden robes on as quickly as she could, tying the sash, then immediately returned to Dirk. Dirk, I'm back. Delia spoke to Dirk with an absolutely shining expression that I had never seen on her before. She was head over heels for Dirk. What's with that cute smile? I've never seen her smile like that before. Delia already had a beautiful face, so seeing her smiling actually took my breath away. Her smile was so filled with love that I actually felt a bit jealous of Dirk. Sister mine, Dirk seems like he's almost ready to roll over. I would expect nothing less from my little brother. He's such a wonderful little boy. Delia sat next to Dirk and stroked his head as he tried his hardest to turn over. To her, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. Not even 10 days had passed since Dirk had come to the temple, but she was already caring for him like a real sibling. Sister mine, it would be wise to leave Dirk to Delia so that we may begin harpspiel practice. At Rosina's prompting, I picked up the smaller harpspiel and began practicing. I played the piece I was currently learning a few times, at which point the door opened. Breakfast had been finished in the orphanage, and Wilma, having seen the children off to the workshop, was here to collect Dirk. Good morning, sister mine. I've come for Dirk. Good morning, Wilma. Thank you as always. And while you were here, I planned to visit the orphanage this afternoon to discuss picture books with you. Wilma nodded with a brief understood in response to my plans, after which she talked to Delia after getting Dirk. She had to ask how he had been last night and how much goat milk he had drunk so that she could predict and prepare for the next time he was hungry. We do not have any Grey Shrine Maidens who have experience raising children. If we don't think of what to do with babies offered to the gods, the orphanage will most likely be unable to function in the future. There were no longer any Grey Shrine Maidens raising their own children who could look after the babies. Considering where these children came from, it was in our best interest for Grey Shrine Maidens to continue not having children. I needed to talk to the High Priest to discuss what to do with future babies given to the orphanage. It wouldn't be reasonable or possible to have any attendants bear the burden of every baby that ended up in the orphanage for the rest of time. I always feel so lonely when Dirk leaves, Delia said, rubbing his head regretfully before eventually giving him to Wilma. This energy always drained from Delia the moment Dirk went to the orphanage, leaving her slumped and melancholic. But Rosina always looked relieved. Their reactions were on the exact opposite ends of the spectrum. I practiced Harspiel until third bell, at which point I went with Fran to the High Priest's room, where I would help him until lunch. After lunch, Fran and Rosina now went to their respective rooms to rest. They had both started to look a bit better now that they were getting regular naps in the afternoon. But the exhaustion was still clear on their faces. Rest well, you two. Please excuse our absence. Now that Fran and Rosina had gone to have their afternoon rest, Delia was the only attendant left in my room. She had finished cleaning and was working on her math, while I was busy making stencils at my desk, waiting for Lutz to arrive. It didn't take him long to finish his lunch at the Gilberta Company and come over with the finished baby toys. Hey, mine, they're all done. Yay, thank you. Lutz shook the darkish red rattles to show that they were finished. I really hoped they would make the babies happy. Camille wasn't quite old enough to really get excited over anything, as my plan was to see what Dirk thought first. I've ordered the paper from Master Benno, too. He'll be ready to supply whenever you want to start printing. You work fast, Lutz. Nah, I still have a long way to go. Mark's always telling me how much time and effort I waste when doing things. It seemed that Mark's education was really bearing fruit. Lutz was saying that he couldn't yet compare to Mark, Benno, or Leon, but at his age, it would be unreasonable to expect him to be that skilled. Mine, don't forget to bring the stencils from Wilma. I'll start getting the workshop ready to print. Leave it to me. After seeing Lutz off, I put one of the rattles in my tote basket, and then walked downstairs with the other one to talk to Daniel, who was in the small hall on the first floor. Sir Daniel, I would like to go to the orphanage. Sure, not a problem, he replied. I power-walked to the door where he was waiting for me, but when I got there, he looked around and gave a stern frown. Wait, apprentice, where are your attendants? Are you really planning on leaving your chambers without one? What? I had thought that wouldn't be a problem since Daniel was around, but apparently bodyguards didn't count as proper accompaniments, like attendants did. It would be extremely unladylike for me to leave without one, so my hand was forced. Delia, I have something to discuss with Wilma in the orphanage. Please accompany me. Sister mine, Delia turned around with a stiff expression, but swallowed her words mid-sentence and bit her lip in frustration. She wanted to refuse me, but couldn't due to her position. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't want to force her to do something she wasn't comfortable doing, but with a knight like Daniel waiting on me, I couldn't waste any more time. You would only need to accompany me up to the orphanage door. Does that sound manageable for you? I can instead ask Wilma to accompany me on the way back, if you so wish. As you wish. Delia took the lead, dejectedly advancing down the hallway. I could tell even while following from behind that her shoulders were stiff and her footsteps heavy. Her face was out of view, but I can imagine the desperate expression she was probably wearing. When we arrived at the orphanage, Delia stopped in place. Well then, I'll be leaving now. I think not, attendant. Open the door before you leave. You would make your mistress, the apprentice, open herself? Daniel's harsh voice rang out as Delia turned to leave. I couldn't open the door myself, and couldn't make a knight open the door for me either. Attendants existed to relieve those they served of such a duty. Delia, having been told to open the orphanage door, paled to the point that her face was pure white. Still, she looked at Daniel with no change in her stiff expression, then reached for the door. She shut her eyes tight and grit her teeth, pushing the door open with a trembling hand. It opened with a heavy creak. Large tables were lined up across the dining hall, which was right in front of the entrance. At the furthest end was a large cushion on which Dirk was laying, surrounded by Grey Shrine Maidens, all of them whom looked this way upon hearing the door. They turned their backs on the pillow and knelt in my presence, arms crossed over their chest. Sister mine, I'll be leaving now, Delia murmured, her head lowered as to avoid seeing inside the orphanage. Of course, and I apologize for making you uncomfortable. Thank you, Delia. It was nothing. Delia glanced over in Dirk's direction, then started to turn around. Her eyes suddenly shot wide open, and she spun around, running straight for the cushion at the far end of the dining hall. Dirk! He had almost successfully rolled over, with half of his body now over the side of the cushion. If he kept going and made it, he would fall right off. Delia thrust her arms beneath where Dirk would be right as he burbled and toppled over the edge. Geez, what would you have done if Dirk had rolled over and hurt himself? Keep a better eye on him. Delia's eyes were flared up in anger as she set Dirk back down in the center of the cushion. Her complaint came from a good place, but the Grey Shrine Maidens had no choice but to kneel and keep their heads down when the Blue Shrine Maiden arrived. All I could do was shake my head at Delia, losing herself over Dirk's cuteness. Well, now that you're in the orphanage, why don't you stay and watch over Dirk yourself? Delia's eyes widened as she realized just where she was standing. She hurriedly straightened up, and I handed her the rattle I had brought with me. This is a toy that makes noise. I was going to give it to Dirk myself, but why don't you give it to him instead? I think he would be happier to play with you than he would with me. Delia looked at the red rattle in her hand, a conflicted expression on her face. He should be old enough to follow after this red color with his eyes now. Or would you rather I give it to him? I think he'd be a lot happier to receive his first toy from his older sister, but... I reached to take the rattle from Delia, but she gripped it firmly and held it up high, too high for me to reach. You can give it to him then, Wilma. Do you have a moment to talk? Everyone else can return to what they were doing. I headed to a table within view of Dirk's cushion with Wilma while the kneeling grave shrine maidens returned to work. Dirk, this is the toy Sister Mine gave us. Can you see it? Delia said, gently shaking the rattle in front of him. Dirk followed it with wide-open eyes. It was obvious that he was attracted to the color and the sound it was making. I had wanted to see Dirk's reaction so that I could determine whether Camille will be ready for it. And he really did seem enraptured. No doubt Camille will be really happy to see it too. Wow, he's looking at it, one of the shrine maidens said. I wonder whether he would like music as well, added another. The shrine maidens were all looking at Dirk and Delia with great interest, having little experience with babies themselves. That made Delia realize she was in public with other people around who would hear her. She stood up and glared at me, her cheeks blushing red. Sister Mine, I'm going back to your chambers. I'm leaving Dirk in your care, everyone. Delia pushed the rattle into the hands of a nearby shrine maiden before charging out of the orphanage. Now that she had gone inside once, I would imagine that if she was gradually spent more time here, she would adjust to leaving her comfort zone like Wilma had. Sister Mine, will Delia be quite all right? I know she has lasting trauma for her time in the orphanage, Wilma said anxiously as she watched Delia hurry out the door. I wonder. I feel like she'll be fine, assuming Dirk's cuteness keeps influencing her. She thinks she hates the orphanage due to the memory she has of her time here. But the cellar Delia was living in has nothing like it used to be. Delia had spent all her time here in a miserable cellar, and had then been sent to the High Bishop's room on the day of her baptism. To her, the orphanage in its entirety was just that neglected cellar. Before today, she had only passed by once or twice at most. Delia would need to really feel for herself that the orphanage had changed, and if she got used to coming here, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem for her to at least enter the dining hall. Besides, if she didn't get used to visiting the orphanage soon, she would no longer be able to see Dirk at all. He would be moved to the rooms where the pre-baptism kid stayed once he was old enough to sleep soundly through the night. I just hope she doesn't end up separated from her cute little brother, I added. Each day when I go to get Dirk, Delia delays handing him over for as long as possible, all the while wearing the loneliest expression you'd ever seen. I can't help but feel that we are doing something wrong by taking him away. It would be sad for both of them if they were to be separated, so I certainly hope that Delia adjusts to the orphanage as soon as possible. Wilma gave a faint smile, her features lacking the exhaustion that could be seen on Rosina and Fran's faces. You don't seem very tired, Wilma. Is that because of all the people here who are able to help you? I only look after Dirk during the day, and I do have others help me. Fran and Rosina end up all on their own when looking after him at night, correct? That sounds quite difficult to manage. It seemed that although Wilma only looked after Dirk during the day, some of the younger children felt like he had taken her from them, and were acting like babies themselves. Some would cling to her at night when she tried to put them to bed. You are like the mother of this orphanage, Wilma. It must be difficult having so many needy children to look after. I recall my loving mother taking care of me in the cellar before my baptism, and I want to give these children who lost their mothers the same love I received. Nothing makes me happier than them thinking of me as their mother, Wilma smiled, brimming with love for the cute little children. At that moment, I was thankful from the bottom of my heart that I had assigned her to manage the orphanage. With that topic over, we moved on to discussing the picture books. I began by telling Wilma that I wanted the stencils, since we'll be starting a new round of printing for the picture book soon. I then explained that we had finished making colored ink, and I want her to plan her future art around it. As we were using the same format of printing as before, that meant we would need a stencil for each color. Finally, I told her that once I had finished making the wax stencils, she would be able to draw more detailed art. You truly do love books, Sister Mine. To think that you would continue inventing so many new techniques for this. I'll put my absolute all into drawing for you. Thank you, Wilma. By the time we had finished our discussion, and I had the stencils from Wilma, Dirk had gotten hungry. He began to cry, but even without Wilma saying anything, the other gray shrine maidens were already speedily bringing goat milk from the cellar and preparing to feed him. They were used to the process by now. If they could look after Dirk without Wilma, it was probably best for me to return to my chamber sooner rather than later. They all had to be extremely conscious of me while working, which was beyond distracting for them. I know it's a heavy load on you all, but please continue taking care of Dirk. Wilma, could I ask you to walk me back to my chambers? Having spoken to the gray shrine maidens, I started to make my way back from the orphanage.
Okay.